Some houses sell you, instead of the other way around. My name's Tyler, and I've been house hunting in Portland, Oregon for months, trying to find something I could actually afford. The market's brutal, overpriced condos, tiny lots, nothing worth the money. So when I got an email from a realtor named Karen about a sprawling mansion just outside the city for way under market value, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It was too good to be true, and yeah, I should have known better. What happened during that showing still keeps me up at night, and I'm not sure I'll ever step into another open house again. It was a rainy Saturday in March, typical Oregon weather, gray and damp. Karen's email said the place was a fixer-upper, a big old mansion on 5 acres built in the 1920s. The price? $250,000. For a house that size, that's insane. Portland's suburbs don't even sell fixer-uppers that cheap. I called her right away and she sounded chipper, maybe too chipper. It's a steal, Tyler. Been on the market a while. Owners are motivated. Meet me there at 3 p.m. She gave me the address, 47 Hollow Lane. I didn't think much of her. Enthusiasm. Realtors are salespeople, right? I grabbed my jacket and drove out. The road to Hollow Lane was narrow, twisting through thick pine trees that blocked out most of the daylight. The GPS cut out half a mile from the house, but I found it. A massive, crumbling mansion looming at the end of a gravel drive. 3 stories, peeling gray paint, cracked windows, and a widow's walk on the roof that looked ready to collapse. It was beautiful in a decayed sort of way, like something out of a Gothic novel. Karen's red SUV was already parked out front. She waved as I pulled up, all smiles, blonde hair tucked under a raincoat hood. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she chirped, like she didn't see the rot. We stepped inside and the air hit me, musty, cold, like a basement that hadn't been aired out in decades. The foyer was huge, with a grand staircase curling up to the 2nd floor, dust coating everything. "Need some love, but the bones are solid," Karen said, leading me through. The living room had a fireplace big enough to stand in. The dining room had faded wallpaper peeling at the seams, and the kitchen smelled faintly of mildew. It was a project, sure, but for that price, I was sold. Then she mentioned the history. "Full disclosure," she said, her voice dropping a little. "There were some incidents here back in the 70s. A family lived here, the Hendersons. Husband went crazy one night, killed his wife and 2 kids upstairs. Cops found him in the backyard hanging from a tree. Place has been empty since, mostly." She shrugged like it was no big deal. "I'm not superstitious. Murder houses don't scare me if the deal's right." So I just nodded. "Explains the price," I said. She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. We kept going. Bedrooms, bathrooms, a creepy basement with rusted tools scattered around. Everything was quiet except for the rain tapping the windows. Then, as we climbed to the 2nd floor, I heard it, a low humming, like someone singing under their breath. It was faint, coming from down the hall. "You hear that?" I asked. Karen tilted her head, then shook it. "Probably the wind. Old houses creak." But it wasn't creaking. It was steady, rhythmic, almost human. I let it go, figuring she was right. Upstairs, the humming got louder as we approached the master bedroom. The door was closed, heavy, oak with scratches gouged into the wood. Karen hesitated before turning the knob. "This is the big one," she said, pushing it open. The room was massive, high ceilings, a cracked chandelier, a 4-poster bed with tattered curtains. The humming stopped the second we stepped in. I glanced at Karen. She was busy pointing out the hardwood floors, acting like nothing happened. But I felt it, a prickling on my neck like someone was standing right behind me. I turned, nothing, just an empty room. I pulled out my phone to snap some pics, wanted to send them to my buddy who flips houses. The first few shots were fine. The bed, the chandelier, the view of the rainy woods through a broken window. But as I lined up a shot of the room from the doorway, the humming started again, louder, closer. I lowered my phone and looked around. Still nothing. Karen was across the hall now, checking her clipboard, oblivious. I hit record, thinking I'd catch the sound. 10 seconds later, it stopped. I played it back. Silence. Just my breathing. And the rain. Weird, but I brushed it off. The tour wrapped up in the backyard. a tangle of weeds and a gnarled oak tree with a thick branch jutting out. "That's where they found him," Karen said casually, nodding at the tree. I shivered, not from the cold. We headed back to our cars and she handed me a flyer. "Think it over. Call me if you're in." I nodded, already half convinced. The price was too good to pass up, ghosts or not. I drove off, watching her wave in my rearview mirror until the trees swallowed her up. That night I couldn't sleep, kept hearing that humming in my head like it had lodged itself there. I called Karen the next morning to ask about the utilities, straight to voicemail. Tried again that afternoon, same thing. By Monday I was annoyed, sent her an email, no reply. Figured she was dodging me, maybe pushing a higher bidder. Then I remembered the photos. I scrolled through them, foyer, kitchen, bedroom. The last one stopped me cold. It was the master bedroom shot, the one from the doorway. Clear as day, there was a figure in the window, a tall, blurry shape in a dark coat staring out. I'd been alone in that room. Karen was down the hall. No one else was there. My hands shook as I zoomed in. The figure's face was smudged like the camera couldn't focus, but those eyes, black, hollow, burned through the screen. I called my buddy, sent him the pic. "What the hell is that?" He texted back, "I didn't know." I drove back to Hollow Lane that afternoon, needing answers. The mansion looked the same, dark, silent. Karen's SUV wasn't there. I knocked, waited, then peeked through a window. Empty. No furniture, no flyer, just dust. Like no one had. Been there in years. I dug into the house online that night. The Henderson murders checked out, 1974, brutal front-page news back then. But there was more. Every few years someone tried to buy it. Realtors, flippers, families. Most backed. Out after a showing. A few disappeared, no trace. Karen's agency had no record of her when I called. Just a generic "she's no longer with us" line. Then last week my phone pinged with a new photo notification. It was from that day, a shot I didn't take. Me, standing in the master bedroom, facing the window. Behind me, that figure, clearer now, reaching out with a pale, bony hand. I don't know what's in that house, but it's not for sale. Not really. So if you see a deal too good to pass up, maybe ask why. Some listings don't let you walk away. What's worse than the storm outside? What's waiting inside? My name's Lauren, and I moved my family to a small town outside Tulsa, Oklahoma last spring. Me, my husband Ben, and our 6-year-old daughter Ellie. We'd been city people our whole lives, but after years of saving we bought our first house, a modest 2-story with a big yard and a storm shelter in the back. Tornado Alley's no joke, and that shelter sealed the deal for us. But what we found down there during our first storm changed everything. I haven't felt safe in that house since, and I don't know if I ever will again. It was late May, peak, tornado season, when the sirens started blaring. We'd only been in the house a month, still unpacking boxes, when the sky turned that sickly green you hear about. The TV blared warnings. "Take cover now, destructive winds inbound." Ben grabbed Ellie, I snatched some blankets and water, and we hustled out back to the shelter. It was a concrete bunker sunk into the ground, about 10 feet by 10, with a heavy steel door and a rusty latch. The realtor had called it a bonus feature, old but sturdy. We'd never been inside before, but with the wind howling and debris already whipping through the air, we didn't have a choice. Ben yanked the door open, and a wave of damp, earthy air hit us. We climbed down the creaky metal ladder, Ellie clinging to my neck, whimpering about the noise outside. The shelter was bare, concrete walls, a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, a couple of dusty shelves with canned goods left by the previous owners. We huddled on the floor. The door slammed shut above us, muffling the storm's roar. For a few minutes it was just us, the hum of the light, and the faint thud of something hitting the roof, probably branches. Then Ellie whispered, "Mommy, who's crying?" I froze. Ben and I locked eyes. "What crying, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She pointed at the far wall, a solid slab of concrete with a faded crack running down it. "There, it's sad." I strained to listen over the storm's dull rumble. Nothing at first, then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched sob like a child holding back tears. It was soft, muffled, coming from behind the wall. Ben frowned. Probably the wind whistling through a vent or something. But there were no vents, no pipes, just that cracked concrete. The crying grew louder, more desperate, like whoever it was knew we were there. Ellie started tearing up, burying her face in my lap. "Make it stop, Mommy," she begged. I hugged her tight, but my skin was crawling. Ben grabbed a flashlight from his pocket and shone it on the wall. The crack was thin, maybe an inch wide, jagged like it had been patched over years ago. "There's nothing back there," he said, but his voice shook. He tapped the concrete with his knuckles, solid, no echo. The sobbing paused for a second, then came back, sharper, almost angry. "Couldn't take it. We need to get out of here," I said, standing up. Ben grabbed my arm. "Lauren, the storm's still raging. We're safer here." But I didn't feel safe, not with that sound drilling into my head. Ellie was trembling now, and I noticed something, a small rusted metal box tucked under one of the shelves, half buried in dust. I pulled it out, hands shaking. It was locked, but the hinges were so old they gave way with a tug. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed and curling, tied with a frayed ribbon. The crying stopped the second I opened it. Ben shone the light over my shoulder as I flipped to the first page. Scrawled in faded ink, "Property of Clara Mayhew, 1952. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. I read aloud. "Mama locked me in the back room again. She says it's for my own good, but I hate it. It's cold and the walls are hard. I hear her crying upstairs, but she won't let me out." My throat tightened. The next entry. "It's been days. I scratched the wall till my fingers bled. She doesn't come anymore. I'm so hungry." The last page was just one line, smeared like it had been written in a hurry. "She's not my mama anymore." Ellie whimpered. "Is that her crying?" I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding. Ben stared at the wall. "That's impossible. This is concrete. There's no room back there." But the dates lined up, 1950s, when the house was built. We'd bought it from an estate sale. The previous owner died years ago, no family left. The storm was still raging, but I didn't care. I needed air. Ben hauled the door open and we climbed out into the wind, rain pelting us as we ran back to the house. The sirens had stopped, but the power was out, leaving us in flickering candlelight. That night Ellie slept between us, but I couldn't close my eyes. The crying was gone, or so I thought. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound, soft sobs, not from outside, not from the shelter, but from the hallway. I nudged Ben awake and we crept out of bed. The sound led us downstairs, growing louder near the kitchen. It stopped when we flicked on a flashlight. Nothing there, just shadows. We checked the shelter the next morning, locked tight, journal still inside. Ben wanted to burn it, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Days passed, and we told ourselves it was over. Stress, storm nerves, whatever. But then Ellie started waking up crying, saying a girl was whispering to her through the walls. "She's mad we left her," she'd say. I called a contractor to check the shelter. Solid concrete, no hidden rooms, he said. Still, every night that sobbing crept back, faint but unmistakable now from inside the house. Last week I found Ellie's crayons scattered in the kitchen, a drawing on the table she swore she didn't make. A stick figure girl with bloody hands, locked behind a cracked wall. We're moving next month. Can't take it anymore. But yesterday, as I packed, I heard it again, crying clear as day from the closet in our bedroom. I opened it, empty except for a single scratched word on the back wall. Stay. So if you're house hunting in Oklahoma, watch out for those bonus features. Some shelters hide more than you can handle. You never know who's watching from the house nobody lives in. My name's Chris, and last summer my wife Jenna, our 8-year-old son Max, and I traded our cramped San Diego apartment for a fresh start in a Sacramento, California suburb. We'd been dreaming of owning a home for years, a place with space, a yard, maybe even a treehouse for Max. When we found a 2-story charmer with a wraparound porch and a price we could actually swing, it felt like fate. The neighborhood was picture perfect. Manicured lawns, kids on scooters, friendly waves from porches. But there was one blemish, the house next door. It had been abandoned for decades, and after what we went through, I'm convinced it's not as empty as everyone thinks. This is our story, And if you've got a vacant house on your street, you might want to pay attention. We moved in on July 10th, a blistering day where the sun baked everything to a crisp. The moving truck groaned as we unloaded boxes, sweat dripping down our backs. Our new place was everything we'd hoped. Fresh white paint, gleaming hardwood floors, big windows letting in golden light. Max ran straight to the backyard, claiming the porch swing as his throne, giggling as it creaked under him. Jenna and I stood on the lawn, grinning like idiots, until I noticed the house next door. It squatted there like a dark stain on the block. Single-story ranch with faded stucco cracking like old skin, windows boarded up with splintered plywood, and a front yard choked with weeds taller than Max. The mailbox was rusted shut, leaning like it might fall any second, and a for sale sign hung crooked, so faded the phone number was just a blur. I asked our realtor, Diane, about it during the closing a week earlier. She'd waved it off with a tight smile. "Oh, that old place been empty since the 90s. Owner died, no family came forward. It's just sitting there, nothing to worry about." Her tone was breezy, but her eyes darted away when she said it. I didn't push, figured it was just an ugly neighbor. We'd learned to ignore. Jenna even cracked a joke as we unpacked that first day. "Maybe we should buy it cheap, fix it up, double our investment." I laughed, but something about the way the house loomed against the sunset made my stomach twist. The shadows around. It seemed too thick, too still, even in the California heat. The first month was a blur. Unpacking, hanging pictures, meeting neighbors over backyard barbecues. Everyone was friendly, swapping stories about the best taco truck in town or the annual block party. Nobody mentioned the house next door much. If it came up, they'd shrug, "Eyesore, huh?" and change the subject. One lady, Mrs. Carter, from across the street, said it had been vacant since she moved in 20 years ago, but her husband shushed her quick. I didn't think much of it. We were busy settling in, Max starting 3rd grade, Jenna painting the kitchen, me rigging up motion sensor lights along the backyard fence to keep critters out. Normal suburban stuff, until Max saw something that flipped our world upside down. It was a Friday night in early August, about 3 weeks after we moved in. The air was cooling off, crickets humming outside. We were sprawled in the living room, watching some Pixar movie Max picked, the blinds open to the backyard so we could see the stars. Max was curled up on the couch between us, his eyes drooping when he suddenly sat bolt upright, pointing out the window. "Dad, who's that?" His voice was small, sleepy. I followed his finger, nothing out there but our yard, the wooden fence and the hulking shadow of the house next door, its boarded windows like blacked-out eyes. "Who's what, buddy?" I asked, ruffling his hair. He blinked hard, like he was waking himself up. "The person in the window." They waved at me. Jenna froze mid-sip of her wine, her eyes meeting mine over Max's head. "What window, honey?" she asked, voice too calm. "That one," he said, jabbing his finger at the house next door. I stood up, heart kicking a little faster than it should have. The movie kept playing, some cheerful song clashing with the silence outside. I stepped to the window, peering out. The house next door was dark. No lights, no flicker, just those boards nailed tight. No way anyone could have waved. "You're tired, Max," Jenna said, pulling him into a hug. Probably saw the porch swing moving or something, but I caught the tremor in her hands as she smoothed his hair. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, couldn't just sit there. "Be right back," I muttered, stepping onto the porch. The night was still. No breeze, no rustling leaves. I swept the beam across our yard, then over the fence to the house next door. The boards were solid, no gaps, no shadows shifting. Nothing. I told myself Max was dreaming, went back inside, and locked the door a little harder than usual. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept picturing a hand lifting one of those boards, someone staring through the crack. The next evening, things escalated. We'd finished dinner, spaghetti, Max's favorite, and were cleaning up when the motion lights snapped on outside. They're the kind that only trigger for big movement, not bugs or wind. I glanced out the kitchen window, empty yard, fence casting long shadows, the house next door brooding in the dark. "Probably a raccoon," Jenna said, drying a plate. The lights clicked off, then flared back on 10 minutes later. Again, Nothing. By 10 p.m., it was a rhythm, on, off, every few minutes. I watched from the window, squinting into the glare. No animals, no branches swaying, just the empty space between us and that house. "These lights are busted," I grumbled, grabbing the flashlight again. Jenna followed me to the back door, arms crossed. "Chris, it's late, just leave it." But I was tired of wondering. I stepped into the yard, the air thick with that summer night smell of cut grass and heat. The lights flicked on as I crossed. The lawn, bathing everything in stark white. I checked the sensors, working fine, no cobwebs or shorts. I aimed the flashlight at the house next door, the beam catching the jagged stucco, the warped boards, the overgrown weeds spilling over. The fence. For a split second I swore I saw something, a shadow, tall and thin, sliding behind one of the windows. I jerked the light back. Nothing there. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Hey, anyone over there?" I called, voice cracking the silence. No answer, just crickets and the hum of the lights shutting off. Back inside, Jenna was pale. "What did you see?" she asked. "Nothing," I lied, locking the door and sliding the deadbolt for good measure. "Just shadows." But I couldn't shake it. That movement wasn't a trick of the light. The lights kept tripping every night after that, always starting around 10 p.m. like clockwork. Max started having nightmares, waking up crying about the lady next door. He'd stumble into our room, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, saying, she whispered his name through the wall. His bedroom faced that house, the window right above his bed. "She's lonely, Dad," he'd mumble. "She wants me to come play." Jenna's eyes got wilder every time he said it. "We need to move," she'd whisper after he fell asleep between us. But we'd poured our savings into this place. Moving wasn't an option. I started asking around the neighborhood, keeping it casual. Most folks brushed it off. "That dump? Just creepy vibes." But one guy, Ray, a retired mechanic who'd lived across the street since the 80s, caught me watering the lawn one morning. He shuffled over, hands in his pockets, and lowered his voice. "You seeing stuff over there?" I hesitated, then nodded. He sucked his teeth. "Last family who owned it. Name was Grayson. Moved out in '95, middle of the night. Had a little girl Max's age. She kept talking about someone in the house, even when it was theirs. Said a lady watched her sleep. They couldn't take it, left everything behind. Realtor tried selling it for years, but nobody stays long enough to close." He glanced at the house, then back at me. "You got motion lights, huh?" "They trip. Tell you a lot." I nodded again. Same thing happened to them. That hit me hard. I didn't tell Jenna, didn't want her freaking out more, but I set up my phone that night to record the backyard from the kitchen window. Needed proof, something. Concrete. At 10:03 p.m., the lights snapped on. I watched the live feed. Empty yard, fence, that house staring back. Nothing moved. I let it run for an hour, then played it back the next morning. My hands went cold. At the 12-minute mark, a shadow, tall, thin, human-shaped, glided across the frame right along the fence line. It stopped, turned toward the camera, then vanished as the lights clicked off. No face, just a dark smear like it soaked up the light. I showed Jenna in the daylight. She dropped her coffee mug, the crash echoing in the kitchen. "That wasn't there," she choked out. "We watched the whole time." Max wouldn't go near the windows after that. He'd sit in the middle of the living room, toys scattered around, refusing to look up. The whispers got worse. He said the lady was louder now, calling him outside. I checked his room one night after he fell asleep. His window was locked, blinds down, but I swear I heard a faint tap, tap, tap like fingernails on glass. I ripped the blinds up. Nothing but the dark yard and that house, boards still in place. I called the cops the next day, filed a trespassing report. 2 officers showed up, poked around next door with flashlights. "Locked up tight," they said when they came back. "No sign anyone's been in there. Place is a dust pit. Probably kids messing with you." I showed them the video. They squinted, shrugged. Could be a trick of the light. But it wasn't kids. Things got quiet for a couple days. No lights, no whispers. I thought maybe it had stopped. Then, last Wednesday, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the motion lights blazing through our bedroom curtains. I stayed still, heart pounding. willing it to be a deer or a stray cat. Then Max screamed from downstairs, not his room, the living room. I bolted out of bed, Jenna right behind me, and found him standing by the big window, tears streaming down his face. "She's waving." "Again, Dad," he sobbed, pointing. "She wants me to come." I lunged for the blinds, yanking them shut, but not before I saw it. A figure in the house next door, one board pried loose from a window, a pale hand pressed to the glass, fingers splayed. The face was a blur, but those eyes, dark, unblinking, locked. Onto mine. Jenna scooped Max up, shaking, while I dialed 911 again. The cops came, searched the house. Empty, they said. No boards loose, no footprints in the dust, just cobwebs and rot. "Maybe a prank," one muttered, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're selling now, taking a loss, don't care." Bin. Staying at a motel while we pack, but yesterday I went back for the last boxes. Max's room was a mess, crayons everywhere. On his desk, a drawing he swore he didn't make. Our backyard at night, the motion lights on, and a stick figure lady, in a tattered dress waving from the fence. Her smile was too wide, teeth sharp like needles, and under it in red crayon, "Come play, Max." I burned the drawing in the motel sink, but last night, the motel's parking lot lights started flickering. On, off, on, off. I didn't look. Out. The house next door looks quiet now, boards back in place, but I know it's waiting. So if your neighbor's place is empty, maybe don't check too close. Some windows see more than you think.